Good afternoon, Canada. Welcome to another True North Report. My name is Andrew Lawton, a fellow with True North, here to unpack the latest and greatest political news hitting the country since, well, yesterday. Things are happening at a pretty quick pace. We'll talk about as much of this as we can in the next little while here. I have to apologize in advance. So I used to host, as many of you know, a daily radio show. And every now and then the nature of being in radio is that you lose your voice. And when the job is pretty much to use your voice, this can be particularly damning. Now, I don't host a daily show now, but for whatever reason, I've got a little bit of a bug. I was traveling over the weekend and into this week as well. So that may be where someone I met along the way in like one of the 27 airplanes I've been on in the last week has given me something. But I've got like a very throaty cough. So I'm just apologizing in advance if I start like hacking up a storm and I start, sounding more incoherent than Justin Trudeau trying to answer a question about SNC Lavalin. That's why. Actually, you know what? No matter how harsh my cough is, I'm pretty sure I couldn't sound that incoherent. But if I like keel over to the ground and the screen goes blank and an alarm siren comes across your phone, that's why. I'll pick myself up and it'll all be okay. But for those of you who can make it through, I do thank you very, very much for your time today. If you're just tuning in, Andrew Lawton here, fellow with True North. And we've got some political news taking place at the federal level that I want to try to weave together because we've got a number of different stories here that I think are all part of the same overarching trend. And truth be told, this is about Justin Trudeau and how much support or how little support he's commanding among Canadians headed into this year's election. And I've said time and time again, when you are an election year, you have to really acknowledge that everything is an election issue. We are at February 26th now. The election is less than 8 months away, which means that anything that happens in Canadian politics can impact the perceptions and perspectives that Canadians have about the polls and about how they're going to vote. So we've got a few things I want to cover here. Number one is the trio of by-elections we had yesterday and the results that aren't particularly surprising but are still interesting. So we'll talk about those. We've got Justin Trudeau finally, I say finally because we've been pushing for it for a couple of weeks now, agreeing to waive solicitor-client privilege in the SNC Lavalin case. And this is going to come to what is hopefully going to be a bit of a climax in this whole ordeal in Jody Wilson-Raybould testifying tomorrow before the Justice Committee. So we'll talk about that. And then we also have the media coverage about the Yellow Vest protest and United We Roll convoy. And the way that this is giving us a fairly good measure of what the Liberals, and I mean the liberal media's, perspective and narrative is going to be headed into the election. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to keep tabs. I've got a few notifications that I'm waiting on just in case things are happening. So if you see me looking down at my phone, I'm just playing Angry Birds. No, I'm not playing Angry Birds. I am doing important news. And if something happens that is not related, I will try to bring my attention back to this. But let's talk about the by-elections first, because no real surprise here. You can get the results, but if you are not someone who enjoys reading the pages of Elections Canada's website, I don't blame you. In York Simcoe, which was a Conservative-held riding for years, with Peter Van Loan resigning as MP, went Conservative. Not even close. Scott Davidson won with 53.9% of the vote. Now, in a by-election, that's not too many votes. That's 8,929. Frankly, when I ran in the provincial election in Ontario, I wish that 8,929 votes gave you a win because I had 17,000. So I still lost, but I had double the votes Scott Davidson had. So that's all. Percentages can kill you sometimes. In Outremont, which was Thomas Mulcair's riding, we'll give you the results in a moment. And in Burnaby South, which was the riding that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was running in, Singh won, also with 8,800 votes, but that only in this riding amounted to about 39% of the vote. So still significantly above his competitors and still very much decisive. But, and here's the big but that comes about in this story, it is going to cause more problems for the NDP down the road. But Outremont is really the interesting one because this was the only case where we saw a riding swing. It has been a long-time NDP riding for Thomas Mulcair. With Thomas Mulcair's departure, the Liberals picked it up again by a very decisive margin, and that was about 40.4% of the vote for Rachel Bendayan or Bendayan. So this is where we've got 3 ridings. 2 of them stay the same. 1 of them switches from NDP to Liberal. I wouldn't be jumping up and down cheering if I'm the Liberals, though, on this for 2 main reasons. The first is that, well, quite frankly, by-elections don't matter. And I don't mean that they aren't important in the makeup of the House of Commons, but by-elections don't matter in the sense of having any broader narrative that we can extract because they are so odd. By-elections have very weird things that happen in them. And this is because you have very low voter turnout in them. The fact, and Connie mentions this in the chat, I was joking about, the number of votes for a win. In by-elections, you're lucky to crack like 28, 29% of the vote a lot of the time. Whereas in the bigger elections, sometimes you can get up to 50% of the vote. So such a significant swing there. And I think that this is because a lot of people can barely summon the necessary strength to vote in a normal election. Any election that happens between that is like, I can't be bothered. So that being said, I want to crunch some of these numbers here, because even if we can't extrapolate a broader narrative from this, we still can look at some of the stories that come about within it. And one of the big ones here, or actually small ones, I think, is the People's Party of Canada. Now, I've been not a fan of the party itself because, like anything, I like to take these situations on a case-by-case basis. But I've been a longtime fan of Maxime Bernier. I think he has the necessary free market bona fides that Canada requires. I also think that he himself has been a straight shooter on a lot of issues. If you want to see what I think about the issues themselves, he and I talk about them in a 30-minute long interview he and I did a few months ago in Toronto. So I would encourage you to look at that interview. And he answers in not politician speak very clearly what he thinks. That being said, he is being cast as a renegade. He's trying to split the Conservative vote. He's unabashedly anti-Scheer, almost as much, if not the same, as he is anti-Trudeau. Maybe even more, because there's a bit of a personal issue here. But the thing is, he goes and attracts this opposition to Conservatives. And what we see here is a really, really poor showing in 2 of the 3 by-elections. I'm going to give you some numbers here. In the Burnaby, I'll do Burnaby South because that's the interesting one. But in Outremont, he got 322 votes for his candidate, James Seal. Now, to put that into context here, I'm looking at the Liberal getting 6,000 votes, the Bloc Québécois getting 1,600, the Green Party getting 1,800, and the Conservatives getting 1,000. So the Greens beat the Conservatives in Outremont. And the Conservatives, with their 7% of the vote, had more than 3 times as many votes as the People's Party did. So the PPC got 322 votes, which is paltry. I mean, independent candidates will get that few typically, sometimes even more. In York Simcoe, the People's Party of Canada actually did get fewer votes than one of those independent-esque candidates. The PPC candidate in York Simcoe got 314 votes. The Green Party got 451. The Progressive Canadian Party, which was like this is like a party that was built in the ashes of the Reform PC merger, where a bunch of old disgruntled PCers didn't like the idea of them merging. That party got 634 votes. So there are more PC party voters than there were PPC voters. So this is in 2 of the 3 ridings. But let's look at riding number 3, because this is a fascinating one. In Burnaby South, where there was no Green Party, you had 2,420 votes for Laura Lynn Thompson, who was the very outspoken People's Party of Canada candidate. That's 10.6% of the vote. Now, 10.6% is far and above what the Green Party typically gets. 10.6% is majorly significant, not because it's going to give you a victory, but because it will very much upset the balance of power. Now, in this particular case, let's say that all of those 2,420 votes would have gone to the Conservatives, which is not necessarily true, but it is a group that spun off of the Conservatives. That would put Jay Shin at about, I'm just doing quick math in my head here, 7,500 votes. Now, that still wouldn't have given him the victory because the winner, Jagmeet Singh, had 8,800. But if you take 10% of the vote, a lot of the times elections are decided on far less than that. And elections are, especially in the Greater Toronto area, in some key ridings in Quebec, these things are decided with 2,000-3,000 votes. So 10% could very much be the determining factor in who wins. And I don't know, I mean, obviously Maxime Bernier says he wants to be prime minister, but for Bernier, a victory is blocking Scheer. And if he can keep 10% of the vote in a few key ridings, doesn't need to be all of them, that could be a game changer. Corey writes, LOL, Burncoat, you suck, Andrew. Well, thank you. Angry Max split the vote in Burnaby to let the NDP win. If that happens again federally, Trudeau gets in again. Well, I don't know why I suck in this particular context. I've said I've been a fan of Bernier on policy, and frankly, any true conservative should be a fan of his on policy. On strategy, on tactics, that is an entirely different story. I said quite candidly in the past and in this show and in my interview with Bernier that I don't like the idea of the vote split. I'm talking about these issues right now as an analyst, not as an endorser. And in fact, I actually was asked individually, not through True North, to endorse a conservative nomination candidate. And I was happy to, because I know that individual candidate is going to be a great representative and a great conservative candidate should he be selected at the nomination. So I'm not at all on the Bernier train, but I'm also not going to cast off what is a significant player in Canadian conservative politics. So if that means I suck, well, tough luck. But I think that we need someone who's going to do this not from a place of anger and not from a place of pettiness, but actually just look at the facts. And the facts are, we right now have a battle about math in the comments here. Right now, just to remind, because Ron agreed with me on the numbers and Corey is disputing the numbers. The NDP would not have won no matter what. In this riding, if every single PPC vote went to the Conservatives, it wouldn't have, or sorry, the NDP wouldn't have lost if every PPC vote went to the Conservatives. But theoretically, in other elections that we have moving forward, those numbers could have been game changers. And that is the issue here, that those numbers could be game changers. Dale writes, Scheer is staring defeat in the face and it will be his fault. So let's talk about this here, because Andrew Scheer has been very quiet on a lot of key issues for a while. And there are two reasons for that. Number one, you don't want to put yourself, when you're in the opposition, out and say, this is what I think X, Y, Z, because you're going to get attacked. That's one element of political strategy here, which is why I had a lot of respect for Andrew Scheer and Maxime Bernier, for that matter, speaking at the United We Roll rally in Ottawa last week, because we've needed a leader of a conservative, and I use a small c there, of a conservative party to step up and say to these Canadians, yeah, we've got your back. You're not fringe. You're not what the Liberals call you. You're not what Iqra Khalid. Did you see Iqra Khalid's tweet to the protesters? She called them unabashedly just racist bigots. And you may remember I had a video out last week exposing the CBC's narrative that this was a white supremacist rally. That's all CBC seems to think here, that anyone who was in the Alberta convoy, anyone that rallied on Parliament Hill, anyone that's standing up against a carbon tax, that they're all just big, dirty, racist bigots. And it's so disgusting that this attitude doesn't just exist in the fringe corners of Twitter, but actual mainstream media coverage and elected officials are casting aside Canadians as just being all of the blancophobes and insert marginalized group of phobes here. And the left in its entirety seems to be eating this up. And I was glad that Andrew Scheer didn't kowtow. So what happened was Andrew Scheer and Maxime Bernier both went to the rally. There were hundreds of people there, which in a cold day in Ottawa is not a bad thing at all. You had, more impressively, hundreds of trucks drive from Alberta to Ontario, and some picked up along the way from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and whatnot. And then they had this big, confab in front of Parliament. And Andrew Scheer was called on by the media to basically disavow it, to say, like, you know, are you against or for the yellow vest protest? And this is what he said outside the House of Commons yesterday. And I'm quoting here from a Canadian press report. The events of last week were organized by people who have lost their jobs, who are facing tremendous anxiety about what the future will bring. I know the Liberals would love to distract from their own failures by pointing to other elements that tried to associate themselves with the event, but my message was very clear. I was there to support energy workers, those who support our natural resource sector, and promising hope for the future come October, when a Conservative government would stand for our energy sector and champion Canada's oil and gas across the world. Now, this is a great line in the Toronto Star, by the way. The protesters' trucks snarled traffic in downtown Ottawa. You know, I don't see the Toronto Star blasting the traffic holdups of, you know, of Idle No More protesters, of anti-pipeline protesters. But no. When a bunch of pro-oil people go in and the story is about the political message, it's how they snarled traffic in Ottawa. Which, let me tell you, if you've lived in Ottawa at all, you know that traffic is already snarled there without the tractor trailers. So I don't think they added too much more than was already the problem. But again, the media coverage has been very much focused on making this to be about racism. They'll find the one or two people that are not representative of the majority and say these people define the masses, these people define the group. And the fact is, with a grassroots movement, anyone can be a part of it. Anyone can join. We don't vet people who go to rallies because you can't. They're outdoor, they're a public event. Anyone can go to Canadian Tire and buy a yellow vest. Anyone can put it on. And if one of them turns out to be a racist, that does not mean that everyone who wears a yellow vest is racist. You know, it's like when I took philosophy in school, there was that syllogism. I think syllogism is the word. I haven't taken philosophy in a while. I think it was, syllogism that, you know, you'd use where, you know, all balloons are red, you know, this is a balloon, therefore this is red, or something like that. And the one that they do to demonstrate logical fallacies was Hitler is a vegetarian, John is a vegetarian, therefore John is Hitler. And it doesn't work like that. But the media will take the one person wearing a yellow vest and either take them out of context or find someone who genuinely may have reprehensible or at the very least incoherent views. And they will then hold that person up as the poster boy for this entire movement. And when you look at the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who donated money, supported United We Roll on social media, these are not racist, white supremacist bigots. No, they're people that genuinely want someone to get Justin Trudeau's job-killing policies out of government in Canada. And I think for the most part, Conservatives in Canada are going to unite behind Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party of Canada. We saw lackluster by-election results in two ridings, which have never been Conservative ridings. Outremont and Burnaby South have always been NDP or Liberal ridings. In this case, one went NDP, one went Liberal. York Simcoe, though, we saw that the PPC message is not really in Conservative ridings peeling away strong support. But I do think the Burnaby South example is an interesting one, because when that candidate, Laura Lynn Thompson, who I've never met, but she seems like a very spunky person, got over 10% of the vote there, it's no surprise that this is also the candidate who was making big waves on social media. She had a little bit of profile going into it. She's been a TV personality. She's written. She worked very hard. She had incredible debate performance. I was watching Laura Lynn Thompson's clips in the Burnaby South debates. And my goodness, the woman did very well. And the media tried to attack her. They tried to slander her. They tried to slam her. And she stood her ground and said, no, this is what I'm about. I'm about these values. This is what the PPC is about. This is what Maxime Bernier is about. And obviously it didn't work. She capped out at 10.6% of the vote. But like I said, that 10.6%, if it came from Conservatives, and I don't know if it did, but if it came from Conservatives, that 10.6%, if applied to other ridings, could be the difference between Trudeau getting in or Andrew Scheer getting in. And the NDP factor is interesting here because Jagmeet Singh is not a popular NDP leader. And I think that may have been part of the reason that the NDP had such a terrible showing in Outremont, the riding once held by Thomas Mulcair. And I say once, I mean not that long ago. So now that the NDP has a leader, people are going to start seeing a lot more of Singh. We're going to see him in question period, and I think we're going to see that he's not at all how exciting the media has tried to make him out to be and how exciting the NDP thinks he should be. And my goodness, there is a lot of buyer's remorse. There's a lot of buyer's remorse about Jagmeet Singh. And had he lost the by-election, there would have been a much bigger ability for the NDP to get rid of him and put someone else new in. And I don't think that's going to happen now. So the NDP is stuck with Jagmeet Singh for the most part. I don't think he's going anywhere. But what I do think is that there are a lot of people in that party that don't want him there. And we've seen a couple of them, specifically from the Quebec caucus, get out of it and say, I don't think I'm going to run, and I don't think I'm going to run again. So that's going to be, I think, an interesting thing here. Someone is asking in the chat, one word, couches. I don't understand why we're talking about couches, but if someone wants to put a giant couch in front of Parliament Hill, then have fun at it. But I will point out that Jagmeet Singh being bad may be great for the memes. It may be funny. It may be great when he implodes, just to watch with a level of giddiness or schadenfreude, but it's going to be very difficult for conservatives because a dissatisfied NDPer is more likely to go to a fringe party or go to the Liberals than they are to go to the Conservatives. And it's not to say people won't jump from the NDP to Conservatives. If the Conservatives are putting a moderate alternative to Trudeau and NDP voters are just they're not all socialists. I mean, people tend to forget that a lot of them are just regular old blue-collar people that think the NDP is offering solutions. That's why we saw the NDP do so well in Ontario in June. But it's less likely for an NDP voter to jump blue than it is for them to jump red. So if you have a really radical NDP leader, which I think most people believe Singh is, that will be dangerous for the right. It will be. And especially if you put in a Bernier factor, which is someone peeling votes away from the right. Like I said, in these three by-elections, the People's Party of Canada was not enough of a factor to block any Conservative win, but it could be in other ridings. And we've got to talk about those possibilities here. Now, Dale writes, the Conservative parties need to merge. I like Bernier's policies way better, but we need to win. There's a lot of that going around. You are not alone in that, Dale. And I think that frustration is understood by a lot of people on the right. And what else do we have here? Michelle saying, if NDP feds get in power, there goes millions from the India crap the turd got us in. I feel like I'm reading a haiku here. Thankfully, I don't believe the federal NDP is headed towards victory. I don't even see a way they get official opposition. Anything can happen, but I would put a fair bit down on that to say that the NDP in its current situation is not going to be headed towards a victory anytime soon. What else do we have here? Alex writes, we need Trump 2.0. Well, I don't think that Trump should be the benchmark for a Canadian politician, but I do think that I do think there is a desire for someone who's going to not kowtow to political correctness. And obviously, if you want to find who the Trump-like figure is, if there is a Trump-like figure in Canadian politics, it's going to be Maxime Bernier. But I don't think the comparison is really all that accurate. And to be fair, I don't think that Trump is good because he's Trump. I think that Trump fits the mold of something that politics needed in the United States, which is first off, someone who's not Hillary Clinton. Secondly, really, someone who's not like Hillary Clinton. And thirdly, someone who's not like everyone that Hillary Clinton is like. And that was a lot of the Republican field of presidential candidates. So I think that if that frustration carries over to Canada, it's not going to be in the same numbers. It's not going to be in the sense that 50% of the country is ready to say, to heck with the establishment. The sad reality is that a lot of Canadians are fairly comfortable with the establishment. And that's something that we see, and there's a lot of frustration in it, but it's something we see time and time again. Canadians are not as, and by the way, I'm not talking about you individually. I'm just saying when we look at the grand scheme of things, Canadians are fairly comfortable with people that fit that mold. Even if a small number aren't, the majority tends to be. And that may well be very frustrating. And that may well change in 5-10 years. But I don't think it's going to change in the 8 months between now and the federal election. So Bernier is the closest thing Canada has to a Trump-like figure because he's a disruptor. He's launched a new party. It's not out of the realm of precedent in Canada because Reform Party leader Preston Manning did that, and he had success. But remember, Preston Manning did not have success in becoming Prime Minister of Canada. Preston Manning had success in moving the goalposts of the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada to become the Conservative Party of Canada. And people need to remember, it took 20 years for that process to complete itself. I guess 18 years. It took 18 years for the reform to become the CPC with the alliance along the way. And this is very important because in that time, we didn't have the conservative leadership with a small c that Preston Manning sought. We had machinations that were moving the party to that point. And if this is what Canadians desire, and if this is what the People's Party of Canada is moving us towards, that is not going to be an 8-month process. I don't even think it's going to be an 8-year-long process. And right now, I haven't yet seen evidence that Maxime Bernier has succeeded in creating what Preston Manning created. It's still early. Bernier has proven himself to be a powerful force in fundraising. Clearly, he can mobilize. I mean, the party has 338 riding associations across Canada. That will make it eligible to be in the leader debates, which is going to be fascinating. So Maxime Bernier, and actually under the new rules, True North Center had an article about this just yesterday, I believe. Under the new rules, debates are going to be organized by a government bureaucracy led by David Johnston, the former Governor General. But here's the thing, the criteria they lay out for who's eligible seems to exclude the Bloc Québécois, but include the People's Party of Canada. Because there are 3 criteria parties must meet. One of them is fielding candidates in more than 90% of the ridings in the country, which Bernier will do, because he's got riding associations. One of them is having at least one MP in Parliament, which Bernier is. Bernier is a PPC MP. So is the Green Party. And the third category is to have a conceivable chance of forming government based on polls and past precedent. So by those measures, 2 of the 3 is all you need. That would suit the Green Party, that would suit the PPC, would not suit the BQ. They can't form government when they only field candidates in Quebec, and they don't have 90%. So 90% of ridings in the country. So it's just not possible. So I'm going to look to see some other comments we have here. A lot of people arguing about what they think of Andrew Scheer. And I will say I know Andrew Scheer not as a friend, but I've met him a number of times, and I think he's a very decent guy on a personal level. I think he is a solid conservative. I also think that he's cut from that cloth of all the politicians that have come before him, in that he wants to be likable. He wants to appeal not to the fire-breathing conservatives, but appeal to the middle-of-the-road, Marcus and Fiona families, or Steve and Heather families. If you've read Tom Flanagan's book, you'll get the reference of just, those average, ordinary people that aren't particularly partisan. And, I mean, that's the winning strategy for Stephen Harper. In many respects, it's the winning strategy for Justin Trudeau. It may well work if he's the guy that can sell the message, but he's not a fire breather. And to be fair, he's never pretended to be. He's never marketed himself as a fire breather. It's just important to note that there has to be a level of honesty. So he may win, and I don't think that he's going to be just an extension of Justin Trudeau, like Maxime Bernier says, but I also don't think he's going to necessarily be a red meat conservative, because he's not yet. He's not yet, and he could be. I want him to be. I've said time and time again, I would love nothing more than for Maxime Bernier to pull Andrew Scheer to the right, and everyone gets what they want, which is a solid and consistent small c conservative party. That's the goal. I mean, that absolutely is the goal here. So let's talk about projections on this. I don't think Justin Trudeau is a lock for Prime Minister. I don't think Andrew Scheer or Maxime Bernier or anyone else is a lock. I think that this election has a lot of variables. The SNC-Lavalin case, I mean, I haven't had time to talk about it too much, but Jody Wilson-Raybould's going to be testifying before the Justice Committee tomorrow. That may well set a chain of events that changes the narrative. But 8 months is still a very long time. So if you paid attention to the by-elections, don't think that there is a narrative from this that will carry you to October. There just isn't. Trudeau is not guaranteed to win because he picked up a seat. Maxime Bernier is not guaranteed to be irrelevant because he failed to. No, it just means that we have a benchmark of what some things could end up as, but it doesn't tell us with any certainty what's going to happen. So still be careful, keep your powder dry, and more importantly, have a level of openness about it. I mean, if you have questions about Andrew Scheer and you're a potential Conservative voter, ask them. Carla says in the chat here she's listening to Andrew speak tomorrow. She doesn't mean me, unfortunately. I'm not speaking in Kitchener tomorrow, but Andrew Scheer speak in Kitchener. Go to events like those. Listen to what he has to say. Maxime Bernier as well. This is a guy who probably would pick up the phone if you wanted to call him and ask him something, so do it. I mean, ask these people. I think as Conservatives, if that's where you identify, you have an obligation, I'd say, or at the very least you have a right to make sure that you're getting the best of the leaders that claim to speak to you. So take advantage of that and make sure that you're listening to that inner voice. I mean, conscience voting, strategic voting, that's your choice, but more importantly, know what the stakes are. And I think that for the ralliers and protesters on Parliament Hill, they figured we can't afford 4 more years of Trudeau. And you know what? A poll shows that many Canadians are in agreement there. We're going to keep this narrative going. Would love to have your support. We need it to keep the lights on because we're not getting a piece of that $600 million media bailout fund. So if you want to support what we're doing at True North, head on over to truenorthinitiative.com, click on donate, and from there look for the Andrew Lawton Heritage Club. And certainly that keeps my lights on here. Thanks very much for your support, everyone. Thank you, God bless, and good day, Canada.